Of many voices. This tent is part of a traveling exhibit that has been following the Lewis and Clark Trail since January of 2003. Started in Monticello, the place of Jefferson's dream for a Western journey, and continued through the eastern states. In 2004, it was in St. Louis, and that's where I joined up along with 6 others. And so I have been on this journey from St. Louis all the way to the Mandan villages in '04, from the Mandan villages to the Pacific Ocean in '05, and now here we are in '06, and we're on our return journey to St. Louis. When Lewis and Clark came on this journey 200 years ago, part of their mandate was to look around, to see what's out there, to meet the people who already lived on the land, and to make friends with those people that lived on the land for purposes of commerce. That's why this whole journey was undertaken. And when the president pitched this to Congress, it was for commerce. So commerce was very important in 1803 and 4, 5, and 6, and it's also still important today. But the Euro-Americans or the Europeans or the Americans, none of those had the monopoly on trade. The Native Americans had been trading with each other for many, many, many years, long before the Euro-Americans came out to this part of the world. And right here was one of the largest trade centers in North America. The Mandan villages were a huge trade center, even during Lewis and Clark's time. They didn't always understand what they saw, and that was one that they kind of missed. They did see one other huge trade center on their journey, and that was at Celila Falls on the Columbia River. So today, at this program, the subject is trade, the trade on the Upper Missouri. And to talk about that, I'd like to introduce to you Frederick Baker, who is Hidatsa, grew up in this area, has lived here many years, farmed here, and we have had him in the tent many times, and it's always a pleasure to welcome Frederick Baker. So let's please make him welcome to our stage.
Okay, testing 1, 2. There we go. Now, if I had something to say, we'd be in business. This kind of seems strange, I've been, as you mentioned, I've been involved in this tent kind of from Monticello on, different places. I've been fortunate enough to speak at Omaha and Pierre, Cheyenne, Eagle Butte, Stanton here, and kind of seems like it's almost like a sentimental time today, because it's probably the last time that this particular group will be. Anyway, my name is Frederick Baker. My Hidatsa name is Yellow Bull, or Gita Bishidish. We're a matrilineal society, so I was born into my mother's clan. I belong to the Locap. Most of the Locaps on this reservation are really from one family, and we've always been involved in trade. There are 3 different tribes here: the Mandans, the Hidatsas, and the Arikara. And I'll talk today primarily about the Mandan and the Hidatsa, because that's what I know and that's what I am. And I noticed that, looking around, that there are some people here that know a lot about the Arikara trade and so forth. So I don't dare go there, because they'll pull my ears if I don't say things right. I see Rhoda sitting over there, Rhoda Starr, one of the experts on the Arikara people, and I won't try to go there. So anyway, suffice it to say that we are 3 different tribes. We have different languages, very much different languages. And we also have different cultures. I think people have the mistaken notion that all Indian people are the same. That you come to an Indian, you say how, and they say how. But we're all different. We all have our own different kinds of culture, different ways of doing things. The Mandans were probably the first group to actually occupy the Missouri. We're not quite sure exactly. And then remember, most of our history was oral history. And oral history really is kind of what you hear and then what you in turn interpret. Any of you, I'm sure a lot of you have read the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, the blind poet, who went around Greece during that time talking about the travels, the Trojan War and the travels of Ulysses. I'm sure if he came back to life now and read some of the account, or read the interpretations of the Iliad and the Odyssey, he'd be saying, "What? What is this? So, who is a Cyclops, etc." Anyway, so that's the thing with oral history, is that it's kind of what we learn. So what I talk about basically is kind of what I've been able to remember from things like what my grandparents told me, what my parents told me, what I've been able to listen to other of my elders tell about the movement, or our whole life as they knew it and as we know it today. Because culture is a living thing. It evolves constantly, and the way we lived when Lewis and Clark was here, the way we lived prior to Lewis and Clark, has changed. And good, bad, or otherwise, that's the way culture is, and it changes. So as I was saying, we're not quite sure. There's some, looking at the Mandan origin stories, our origin stories put us at somewhere by a big water, whether it was the Gulf of Mexico or whether it was maybe further down south, we're not quite sure. There's some of us believe that, and that's a reason to believe that maybe we came from somewhere maybe further to the southwest, and somewhere along the line we acquired corn, which became a staple, and corn became very important to us because then that was one of our major trade items. And we know that from looking at archaeological digs and so forth, that at least around the year 700, we were living somewhere around the area at Fort Pierce, South Dakota, or the Bad River, that area in there. And we were living in earth lodges, and there were times when our earth lodges were heavily fortified, and sometimes when they were not. So we believe that whatever there was the cause, that there were times when we weren't as fortified as we were at other times, and sometimes not fortified at all. So we went through different eras. But as I say, around 700, somewhere thereabouts, there was this. We were living at the Bad River, around the Bad River down in Pierce, South Dakota, and we were agricultural at that point in time. We raised corn, certainly, and corn just wasn't one variety. There were 13 clans of the Mandan tribe, Mandan people, and each of those clans had responsibility for a certain variety of corn. So we know that we had at least 13 different varieties of corn that we raised here in this part of the world. And besides being responsible for the corn, of course, those 13 clans also had different kinds of roles. Then eventually we moved up the river, and I suspect that as we used the resources up and the land became, we used land of it, so forth, that we began to move slowly up north. Most of our gardening was done probably in the river valley. If any of you remember what the Missouri River used to be like before it is as we see it today, because years ago when I was growing up, you look out here, and if we were sitting on this very spot and looking out, we would see such big trees that we probably wouldn't even see where the river actually went through. That's how dense the forest or the cottonwood trees were in certain parts. And then each year there would be a big flood. When the river broke up, there would be large chunks of ice going down the river, and eventually somewhere along the line they would do what we call gorge. They would kind of get caught in something and then form kind of a natural dam, and the water would back up and flood, and and that kind of seemed to enrich the soil because certain cottonwood trees certainly use that. There's a fear nowadays with the river system being dammed up the way it is that the cottonwood trees may disappear. But this was so every year there was kind of a refreshing of the soil, so to speak. So we planted our gardens down where these sandy loam type soils were. For one thing, they were easier to dig down there. And number two, we discovered that they would produce good crops. So we had some pretty large crops. Sometimes they would talk about these things being maybe as equivalent of a couple of football fields. So we raised corn primarily. We raised beans, squash, pumpkins, sunflowers. Those were the major crops. And then ceremonial tobacco. So those were the major crops. And we've, again, going back to as early as 700, we've been raising crops. And then because we were living in sedentary villages and because we had these crops and we would raise enough to have extra so that we could use it, then the nomadic tribes would come to us and would trade. And there were certain times of the year that they would do this. And we had a pretty elaborate system. Sometimes they referred to us as the Walmart of the Missouri, and I'd like to refer to us really more as the Sam's Club. Because in Walmart, anybody can go in and buy things and pay for it and leave. Well, in Sam's Club, you have to pay a fee. And we had that system. We got, early on, we discovered that, we're going to charge these folks a little fee. The way we did that was that, in order to come and trade with us, you had to be adopted. And so for the privilege of being adopted, you had to give some of your goods away to us. And so that was the fee part. And also, I suppose we were somewhat arrogant in that we look at some things, and if we didn't think that they were worthy, nobody, if people didn't agree to adopt you, you were kind of SOL. You had to pick up your stuff and go back and get some more stuff. So we had that system in place, and we were also pretty astute traders. We understood the importance of customer relations, of marketing, and all those kind of things, but especially customer relations. And early on, I know that we had, we were trying to get in contact. We heard about the French, and we were trying to get into contact with them because they had things that we wanted to trade with. But unfortunately, the Assiniboines kind of blocked our way. And so we were trying to figure out a way to get these, get a direct contact with the French and get rid of these middle guys, because if we had to trade with the Assiniboines, we had to give them some of our stuff, some of our profits, and so forth. So, being good businessmen, that's not a really good deal. So one time, I think since about 1700, we've been dealing with the French. And a man by the name of La Vérendrye was, I think, the first one to actually write. But there's a story that I heard that talks about how when the French first came, we heard they were coming somewhere within our vicinity, and we wanted to get in contact with them. And so they sent out their warriors with good horses and all those kind of goods, and went out and they met these Frenchmen and brought them to our village. And we, I'm sure, gave them the best place to live, gave them good food and that kind of thing, and made these contacts. Well, most people would probably think that, we had interpreted these guys as some kind of gods and we were worshiping them. In fact, they took the leader, and as they got close to the village, they carried him actually to the village. Well, but the actuality is that, it's like, if somebody was going to build a big plant here in Newtown, a whole bunch of jobs and all those kind of good things, and they were going to come to visit. We'd sure as heck go out there to Minot at the airport and meet them and bring them in here and wine and dine them. Well, it's no different than what we did. That's how we got our relationship with the French going, and then we began to trade directly with the French, and many years. So and at one time, we were pretty much the kingpins of the upper Missouri. I think there's documentation by the archaeologists, by the anthropologists, and of course our own stories that tell us that we were talking about the Arikara a while ago. They had a major trade system down probably by the Grand River, around the Grand River near Mobridge, South Dakota. About the time that Lewis and Clark came here, we had a major trade system out here. That's say about In 1781, we had a major smallpox epidemic, the first of two major smallpox epidemics. And it really affected the Mandans. And possibly because, number one, we had no immunity to it, we had no idea what the disease was, and also the fact that we lived in these earth lodges, was an ideal place for the disease to grow. And so in a very short time, we went from being about 10 villages, each capable of raising, probably each having maybe 1,000 or maybe more population. And some of these villages were much larger, to 2 villages, all within the blink of an eye. I mean, it hit us, everybody just died. And so a couple of things happened to us. One was that we lost a lot of our traditional things, because in our culture at that time, if one were to have medicine, or if one were to develop certain things, they would buy the right to use that, and then they would study very carefully how that person that they bought it from used it, and would so that's how we did those kind of things. So everybody was gone. So we lost in 1781, we lost a major portion of our culture as far as the Mandans were concerned. And I remember one time I was working at Rosebud, South Dakota. I spent most of my working life working in among Indian people. I've been a school teacher over among the Chippewas and over in Minnesota. Worked as a health educator on all the reservations in North Dakota except this one. And then I also worked, I went into healthcare management. I went to the University of Michigan. And I worked as a healthcare manager. I also spent 12 years, I worked up in Alaska, so I've been kind of I'm a real nomad. I've been always looking for the buffalo. And so anyway, what that was leading me to, but I lost my train of thought somewhere, which happens when you're my age, you get to the point where you're saying, where am I? Who are these people? Rosebud, thank you. Rosebud, key. Anyway, I was a Rosebud, talking to an old man, one of their elders, and we were kind of talking, and he said, where are you from? And I said, up north. Well, that's what the folks down there refer to us as people up north. Right, Deb? We're the folks up north. And in their language, the word for us is toha. For years, we've been enemies with the Sioux. And their word for us is toha, which is the word for enemy. But anyways, he was telling me, he said, yeah, there were those people up north. He said, they were great big fellas. And, my brother Marley's sitting here, they're probably all about his size, and not only big in size, but there were also a whole bunch of them. And he said, though we didn't mess with them, he said, because they were just like hornets. He said, you get them mad and they chase you until they get you. But he said, they had a lot of good things to eat. And we used to trade. We used to take buffalo meat over there, and we'd trade for these good things to eat. He said, all of a sudden, he said, they got sick, and they all died. So he was telling me, I'm sure, about the old man, the Mandan. And this is kind of how, So by the time Lewis and Clark came here about 20 years or so later, in 1804, number one, we had a reputation for being friendly, and the reason we were friendly was because we understood, again, the whole idea of customer relations. Trade was very important. We would trade our goods, and people would in turn bring us things like hides and dry meat and all those kind of things. So it was a good exchange. And we also traded wide enough so that there were evidence of things from both oceans that with the artifacts or whatever they were making up there. I mean, it found its way to us. At one time, we were kind of the trade center between the horses of the Southwest and the guns of the Northwest. So anyway, we came along, and when Lewis and Clark came here, a couple of things. One is that we looked at them as a potential chance to get some of our power back, because we just gone from being this large, powerful group to all of a sudden being this small group. And I'm sure our enemies begin to start to have a real impact on us. And so that was so when Lewis and Clark came here, again, those two things. One, we saw the potential, we saw the weapons they were carrying, and and thought that was pretty impressive, and would like to trade for some of those things. So those were the reasons I think that Lewis and Clark were welcomed. But because really, number one, in our history and in our stories and stuff, there is really virtually nothing about Lewis and Clark. We've been again dealing with white guys since 1700 about. So these guys were nothing new. Just a bunch of white guys living across the villages. They made friends with Shehekshot and Black Cap, the other folks of our leaders, and so we kind of took a responsibility to take care of them because we knew right away that these guys had no experience living in this part of the world, and living out here, in the living out here in the wintertime, can get pretty wild, and so we took the responsibility again because of their friendship to Shehekshot and to Black Cat. We took the responsibility to try to look out for them so that they wouldn't get in trouble, or they wouldn't freeze to death, or they'd had something to eat or whatever. And our chief said to them, if you're welcome here. When we eat, you eat. If we have to starve, you're going to have to starve. And those kind of things. So that's kind of the spirit with him. I think the feeling sometimes history gives you kind of the impression that they brought this marvelous culture and so forth over here. Well, really not. I mean, we took care of them and helped them survive the winter and saw them leave again. We couldn't quite figure out really what they were doing because they weren't traders. They didn't really have anything. They had these little medals, peace medals, and saying. And then the Hidatsas. Well, let me finish the Mandan part. And so that's really what kind of all they had. So I think most of us were trying to figure out, what are these guys doing? Why are they on a vision quest, trying to find some kind of a big mission or vision by going to the mountains, going to that ocean? Are they on that kind of a quest? What are they doing? Because to us, exploration really wasn't a thing. We didn't explore for the sake of exploring. This is Mother Earth created by the Creator, and we were part of it, and we accepted it, and we adapted to it and so forth. But we didn't really want to conquer it or explore it or those kind of things. And so that was kind of a foreign phenomena. So we never could figure out really what these guys were doing. But they went upriver, and I guess the Hidatsas in particular figured that they'd never see these guys again. And here, lo and behold, about a year later, they show up. And everybody's very surprised to see these guys. But so that was kind of the Mandans. Again, they were major traders with agricultural products, and we had established a major trade zone right here. Our competitors were the Erikara brothers and sisters who lived around Mobridge, South Dakota at that time, and they also had a major trade route. And at times we would war with them, and at times we were at peace with them. You remember, if you're reading the journals, that the person, when they left the Erikara village, one of the Erikara leaders came with them up here to the Mandans. Number one, for the purpose of introducing them, and number two, they were going to, at a time, relations were kind of tight between the two, and they were out here to make some indication that they wanted to talk peace and so forth. So, so that was our relationship there. There were three different groups of Mandans. Well, and they also had different languages. And the other thing that we talk about, is that the Lewis and Clark expedition really missed what was going on in the villages. They had some ideas that they were coming to be among savages, that this territory was totally uncivilized. There was really nothing out here. They even thought that at one time that there were some woolly mammoths wandering around this country. And so they came here with that idea. None of those folks really had any, were not ethnographers, although they did some ethnography. They weren't really scientists, although they gathered things. And so they were, with their own particular frame of reference. They came here looking for evidence that we were savages, and that they're going to bring this marvelous civilization to us. Well, really so happened that when Lewis and Clark came here, we were we were pretty civilized, organization. For one thing, just the women, we were what matrilineal society, as were the Hidatsa. And so, we were all, the women kind of owned pretty much everything. They built the lodges. If any of you were at the closing ceremony this morning, you heard Amy talk about how hard the women worked and so forth, while we were out protecting and doing hunting and doing those kind of things. So we each shared. But the women owned everything. They owned the lodge. They owned, if there was a big buffalo kill, they owned the meat. And interestingly enough, even in the trade, I'm led to believe from stories that I've heard from my elders that when the people came to trade, say a group of Assiniboines came here to trade, and probably this time of the year would have been a good time because that's when they were out hunting and so forth, come here to trade, that the women really were the ones that would look at what they had, and if they wanted a particular item, they would give the men some, maybe a burden basket or two of corn, and say, you go bring me such and such. And so your job was to go out there and to negotiate that, and bring back to her, what she told you to do with the price that she told you to pay for it. So that was the haggling that went on. Also, our system of life, we had, the family structure was very strong, and most of the families were, households where there were, usually the men had more than one wife. And then they also, when you got married, you went to live and become part of your wife's household. Your Mahirivia tells about how she got married. Mahirivia was one of the last people that lived in the 5 villages. But she tells about how she got married. One of the things in the whole courtship thing was that they would, at certain times of the day, young women would go to the river or go wherever the water was and bring water, and they had these big bladder basket or bags, and they'd bring the water up. And if you were interested in meeting a young lady, or if you're interested in a certain young lady, you might go up and ask her for a drink of water. And if she shared a common interest, she'd probably give you a nice glass of water and go on. If she wasn't interested in you, you go up there and ask her for a glass of water, and she'd probably do the Mandan Hidatsa equivalent of buzz off, bozo. And so, wait, next turn. And as they got to be more interested in each other, usually the bargaining for the marriage was done, and we were kind of symbolic in a lot of ways, because we would be kind of told what to do, and then we'd go and do it. I remember somebody was telling me a story one time about the negotiations, because when the Christians came here, when the other government came here and so forth, they didn't want to deal with women, because remember back about then, women were a step above chattel in the major community. So they didn't want to deal with the women, they'd deal with the men. And a lot of times if we were in a meeting, we'd be out here sitting out in the front talking. Behind us would probably be sitting our wives. And as we were carrying on the conversation or involved in this negotiation, where it was, we'd have to stop occasionally and turn around and look. And if our wives were going, we were in trouble. I had to get on the stick. And if they were going like this, it probably has. They were going like this, and it's a. So anyway, so the women had a lot. Anyway, going back to this, so once in Wakirivia's case, once she got interested, his father came to their lodge and brought presents. He probably bought some horses, maybe some buffalo robes, blankets, whatever, to impress the family. He came in and told Wakirivia's father that you're a good family, and all those kind of things, and then give him all kinds of praise, and then he'd say, I want my son to be a part of your family. And then he would leave, leaving all those gifts tied outside. And so in her case, her father, son of the star, right? What was her? Oh, small ankle. I'm sorry, small ankle was her. Anyway, get myself confused here. But anyway, her father decided that she was too young, that he didn't want his daughter to marry this guy right now. So he took all the things back and went back to that household and told them that he said, my daughter is too young to marry. But the young man and his father were really insistent. So a while later, they went back again and brought more gifts. And they, again, went through the same spiel, saying, you're a fine family. I want my son to be part of your family. So, anyway, so Wahili's father thought about that, and he thought, this man is a good hunter. I've been with him on different occasions, and he's brave, he's kind. He'll be good to my daughter. So he talked to Wahili, and she agreed that, that she would marry this guy if it was her father's choice. And so they took gifts over there to him and said, yes, we will allow your son to come and become part of our family. So then the next thing they did was the Wahili's family then prepared a bunch of what we call feast foods, a big feed. And they took that meal and went over to his lodge and came in, and so they said, why are you here? And she looked at the young man and said, because I want you to come and live in my lodge. And so they set the feast foods down and they left. And so after they got through with the feast, then he picked up his stuff and went to live with Wahili and became part of that. That's how marriage was in those days. And again, divorce was really simple. You have to go to an attorney and argue about anything. All she had to do was take your stuff. If you weren't good enough, she'd take your stuff outside, and when you came back from wherever you were, that was the sign, saying, adios, buddy. So you better hope that one of your female relatives has space for you to live until you can find somebody else. So, but that's how our that part of our culture. There were a lot of things. Again, the family was the basic group, and as I say, these were people had various different roles to play. And then we also had a clanship system, or a system of clans. And these clans were composed, I was saying, of the people that were born into my mother's clan. There were, the Mandans at one time had 13 clans. At this point in time, there are 7 clans in existence today, right here on this reservation. And the role of the clans basically was to mediate if there was any problems between families. I'm understanding that we lived in earth lodges with very close proximity, so there had to be some system of keeping order, or else we couldn't afford to have a Hatfield and McCoy type of problem in a small village, because you can imagine what would happen. And so they had this very elaborate system. And if say that I did something to your clan, and your clan this person got hurt as a result, my clan would go to that person with gifts and would try to make peace with that clan. Of course, they might come back and take it out on me, but which they should have done. But so that's and so we kept peace within our clan, or within our villages by that system. And then further up was also the societies. And the societies were all age grade societies. There are actually 2 types of societies. One was the leadership, the warrior societies, and these were all age grade societies, and they were societies that you earned your way into. The first society that young people, I suppose they're the young men that first came kind of into puberty and so forth, people would observe these young men because they were already hunting and doing things, and they would take a group like that and they'd recommend that they buy their way into that society. And so the families and the clans would support these young men and give them things so that they could buy their way in. And And then once they were in that society, and the first society was called the Stonehammers. And the things they did in these societies were learning skills to survive. And one of the things that we did, both as partly to prove how brave you were, and for other reasons, we would go to other tribes, and as my brother Gerard always say, we never stole things, we'd borrow them. And unfortunately, those other tribes wouldn't appreciate us borrowing them, so they'd come back and they'd borrow something from us, and this was kind of a way of, but the whole system of stealing horses, and so these young Stonehammers in particular were taught how to steal. And then, so one of the rituals that they did when they got through with their ceremony and these guys became Stonehammers, all the people in the village would line up. And these young boys would come running through, actually, I suppose, and then the people of the village would hit them with whatever, to punish them because they knew they were going to steal from them. So that was an interesting, that reminds me of the boarding school I went to. I went to school at Assumption Abbey, and we had a rather elaborate year of orientation or initiation. And one of the things that we did was, we had a thing called a paddle line. And if you were a freshman, all the seniors would line up, and you'd have to crawl through those seniors, and they'd be paddling you as hard as they could. So it kind of reminded me of all the Stonehammers, so maybe I have a right to be a Stonehammer. Anyway, and then as they got good enough, they went on to the next society. They would buy their way into that society en masse, and so forth. And eventually, if they were really outstanding warriors, outstanding hunters, good strong medicine, were proven to be good people, and were kind and could be depended upon and so forth, they eventually became part of the Black Moss Society, and that was kind of the epitome of the men's warrior society. Women also had the same kinds of societies, and they came up the line as well. And then when you got too old to carry out the responsibilities of the Black Moss Society, then you became part of either Crazy Dog or those societies. And really these old guys were kind of the policy makers. They would decide whether a village should move. Some of the roles of the Black Moss were, that's where our winter chiefs came from. Okay, 10 minutes. We have a sign language here, so don't mind us. The Crazy Dogs were kind of the enforcer. I mean, they were the ones that made policy. During the summer, we lived up in earth lodges, much like if you were up the Earth Lodge Village, you probably see those earth lodges up there. That's pretty much where we lived. In the wintertime, the Black Mouse among themselves selected a winter chief, and they would break up into groups, and they'd go build a smaller village down in the river, or on the riverbanks where the big trees were, and where there was plenty of shelter and plenty of wood and so forth. And if any of you have encountered North Dakota blizzards or been in North Dakota in the wintertime, you certainly know that it's a good idea not to be sitting on top of a hill when it's blizzarding. So that's where we lived in these. And then in the wintertime, as I was telling you about, in the springtime when the floods came through, usually they would, the water and so forth would destroy these villages, and then each year they would build a new village. In the winter villages, the old folks, they'd build the regular lodge, and then there'd become a little addendum, or a little porch, or another room, I suppose you want to call it that. And in this room, usually the old folks and the youngsters would pretty much stay in that area. Fantastic place for learning to take place, fantastic for bonding between grandparents and these little youngsters. So because of oral tradition, a lot of the things they would tell, and I was fortunate enough to experience some of that, because about the first 8 years of my life, we lived over in Lucky Mountain, which is probably about 20 miles the way the crow flies, right down the river here, below water, of course, now. And we got a chance to, my grandfather was a full-blood Hidatsa, couldn't speak a word of English, My grandmother on my mother's side was half Hidatsa and half English. Her father came from probably Liverpool, England. That's from what we can gather. So I always tell people that I'm probably related to the Beatles, but I haven't. So I got a chance to spend my first years, my formative years with them. I learned how to speak Hidatsa fluently. In fact, I learned how to speak Hidatsa fluently and English at the same time. Can't remember when I couldn't speak either language. And so I got a chance to kind of experience that, where I was kind of my grandfather's little tail for years and during this time, and learned a lot of things from him. I tell you, I used to spend time with his old cronies that would come in and would visit. He was a full-blood, but carried on very much the tradition, because they had a great big garden. We used to have a thing called a community garden over in Lucky Mount, and all of the people in that area had their own garden plot, much like they would have back in the days of the 5 villages or beyond. They had their own garden plot. They would raise corn and those kind of things, although potatoes came into existence until. And then we also had cattle and we had horses, so we were really self-sufficient, and really took and did everything pretty much by horses. And so I got a chance to learn a lot of the old language. I remember one of the interesting things was that a lot of my grandfather's old cronies, about his age, and he was probably in the 70s by then, would come in to visit. And in the white culture, when you're visiting, it's kind of really uncomfortable if there's quiet, if there's no one talking. Well, in their situation, sometimes they would talk, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes one of the guys would tell something. He may tell a story, or he may know of some incident that happened, that he would tell the rest of these guys, so they'd talk about. But sometimes, they just come in there, and I was their gopher, so I'd usually get them something to drink or whatever, and they'd be sitting there, and pretty soon they'd say, "Well, I'm going to go now." I'd say, "Oh, I'm glad I seen you," and they'd go. Or sometimes somebody would tell something, and then the rest of them would sit around. Sometimes they'd smoke a pipe, and pass a pipe around. We didn't really have cigarettes in those days. Sometimes we would make, occasionally bull derm and roll their own, but basically it was a pipe. And it was, they just smoke a pipe and pass it to the next person, and take a few puffs and pass it on, and so that was kind of our social structure, and back when I was growing up in the Hidatsas. Not too much time to talk about the Hidatsas, but let me quickly say there were also 3 different groups of Hidatsa. The first Hidatsas probably, and they all have different origin stories. The one group came from the sky, charred body. They think their origin story puts them around the Washburn area. Another, the Hidatsa proper, probably came from their origin story puts them under the ground, and came up and saw buffalo and so forth, and moved up. And the other group came from probably somewhere over on the north, probably up on the other side of the Turtle Mountain, somewhere in that area. There's also some theory that at one time maybe the Hidatsas and Mandans had been neighbors somewhere down in the southwest. Again, telling you about our origin story might put us at the mouth of the Mississippi or somewhere in that area, and they were moving back and forth, and eventually got back together again. The Mandan word for Hidatsa is Midi Dadi, or people who want to cross the river. And according to that quick legend, there's a group of Hidatsas came over to where the Mandans, probably somewhere around the Knife River, where the Mandans were. This is probably around 1100, 1200, somewhere in there. And they saw the Mandans across it. They were trying to talk to them, sign language or whatever, and the Hidatsas were talking about, crossing the river. Midi Dadi means, crossing the river. Midi Dadi Wawa, so we're going to cross this river. And so they thought that was their name. And so, to this day, that's the Mandan word for the Hidatsas. At least one of the 2 dialects is Midi Dadi. And so the story is that they put corn on their arrows, and they shot corn across, and motioned them to eat it. And so they did, and it tasted good. I mean, it was parched corn. So they said they would come back, and so eventually they went back and they told the rest of their tribe. They said, we found some people over here, and they have some really good things to eat. And so they decided to go join them. And so they came over, crossed the river, got together with the Mandans. And this went on for a while. The Mandans finally said, they said, if we're different. We have different ways. And if you stay here, eventually our young men are going to fight each other because our ways are different. And so we want you to move down or move up north and build your villages there. But don't go so far away that we aren't close, because then we're bound to become enemies and then be fighting each other. So go until you can no longer see the smoke from our lodges, and then build your villages there. And so that's probably why the major Hidatsa villages were built around the Knife River, around if you ever go out that way and visit Stanton, there's a 5-village memorial site there, and so that's and that's the other bunches of Hidatsa came over as time went on. So anyway, I think my time is. Let me stop there, okay? Suffice it to say that trade, we've been engaged in trade for a long time. Even to this day, I noticed that and we evolve. And we kind of go with the flow, so to speak. And in this day, I noticed that one of our young men here was dressed up in his Indian costume and was having tourists take pictures for $2. And I thought, we've gone, we've adapted. We've adapted. So with that, it's been a pleasure. Glad to answer any questions.
I'm going to say we could fit in 2 questions. So if you got a question, raise your hand and I'll come to you, and then we can all hear your question. So here we go. We'll get it started.
I'd be interested to know how many people constituted a family, a clan, and how many people lived in an earth lodge, typically.
That's a good question. No one really knows for sure, depending on the size of the earth lodge and I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 15.
We have one final question out here. Got Frederick Baker here. He's a good man to ask. Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's please thank Frederick Baker for his presentation. And I would like to also encourage you to come back at 5 o'clock, our next program, and it will be our last program here at Newtown. Amy Mossett will be here, and so come and join her in her program. And as I said, that will be our last program of the day, and we will close at 6 o'clock. So take some time right now, go visit our child-sized keelboat, the dugout canoe, our American Indian table, and our front desk over here in the exhibit tent. And the Montana National Guard is back here in their camouflage, so go back and visit with them as well. Thank you all for coming out.